Hi everyone, it's Grant Abbott speaking, and welcome to this session on advanced pension planning. Now, normally I have slides up here, but this time I decided to do something different. This was an article that came out of the SMSF Advisor magazine this morning. You can see there the 11th of February, and in fact it was yesterday, but it talks about succession plans must be consistent across SMSF's family trusts. And I would also put it to you that it also needs to be across our estate as well, our wills and our testamentary trusts. For those of you who watched the Protector session yesterday, part of that process is to effectively take equity out of non-SMSF investments and place them into a leading member discretionary trust that is primarily built for lineage or bloodline. So again, we're starting, for those of you who've been on the journey with me, we started off through this SMSFs. My original background is through trusts and trust law. I fell into superannuation, and certainly along the way I've learned a lot on estate planning, so that we're now opening up these new possibilities to ourselves. And it's quite interesting because no one else is really doing this act. You'll see that there's a lot of lawyers who profess to be estate planning lawyers, but they direct everything to the estate. And it's quite amazing when you have a look at all the Family Provisions Acts and all the cases. Essentially, the guts of the case is where the testator or the document, the will, has effectively left out all the dependents or the eligible persons, which seems to me that there's no such thing as a simple will anymore. I know your clients probably want it, it just goes to me and then goes to my spouse, but effectively that doesn't work. So this new process, this succession planning and asset protection, where SMSF is a subset of that, as is our discretionary trust, really is a brand new field of expertise for all of us. And for me, it's exciting new diversification from the SMSF field, and certainly something that I know all of you are pretty excited about. And for that, look, I thank you for all coming along with me on this journey. And I promise you, the stuff I did today, I've been building this, presentation for probably about a day and a half. Sorry, it says 5th of February, but in fact it's the 12th of February. The issue that we have with it is that once you start diving down into the rabbit hole, depending on whether you've got a red pill or you've got a blue pill, I think most, certainly next week, you'll see at the SMSF Association conference, there'll obviously be 1 or 2 sessions on estate planning in SMSFs, but primarily they're just the tip of the iceberg. Now, a lot of our clients might have quite a significant amount of money sitting inside an SMSF, but is that really the best place for it? Can we, in fact, do something differently? For that, we need to know all our laws around self-managed, but we also need to know our laws around succession acts in our various state. We also need to obviously know the Companies Act and also the Income Tax Assessment Act, plus obviously throw in trust law and a whole lot of other things, so that the case study that I'm building today and that we're going to go through today, I'm not, and I'll tell you straight away, there's no way in the world that I'm going to get a perfect answer on that today. I'm going to give you my ideas, but certainly it will be one of the 5 case studies, probably the opening case study that we will look at on the 23rd and 24th of March in our 2-day succession and asset protection workshop up in the Novotel up on Sunshine Coast, which has now been sold out, which is great. Now, let's pull it back and even have a look at a subset and start to look at pensions. So I'm going to look at pensions, but I can't just look at pensions in isolation because I have to look at everything when you look at a case study. But let's drill down and have a look at pensions. Pension law, much like annuity law, shows that pensions have 2 levels of flexibility. For us in superannuation, the originating pension is the key, and really at the end of the day, there are limited options. So the first and foremost, if we have a look at SIS Regulation 1.06, one, remember we had a look at that last week and we'll go and look a bit later on, is that in order to have a pension, which is primarily a superannuation concept, the monies have to come from a superannuation fund. So I can't just take money and start up a pension anywhere. I can't just take money from outside, go to a trustee of a super fund and get them start up a pension. It doesn't work that way. We have to build an accumulation account first, so that if we have a look on death and a member dies, and inside the deed, it provides that the member's membership ceases on death, then effectively it doesn't matter what you've done with that pension, unless it's auto-reversionary, it ceases at that time and rolls back to the accumulation account. So unless it's paid out, it rolls back to the accumulation. So the same way to start a pension, we can't just go and start a pension. We have to put our money into an accumulation account. And then what happens from there is we then start to build that pension. Now, if we have a look at that with the pension, we can't add capital to it again, so we can start a pension. But if we've got a pre-existing pension, originating pension, we can't simply add extra, we can't effectively add extra capital to it, because effectively that would mean I'm adding capital on something that's pre-existing. The same thing is that if I went down and I have a look at the terms and conditions of my pension, and they're, for example, just for my lifetime or until the account runs out, just a typical account-based pension. The problem is if I then go and say, I now want this to be reversionary, or I build in an auto-reversion, which means that effectively it continues on post my death. That's such a fundamental change to the underlying terms and conditions of the pension that in fact it creates a resettlement of that pension. So the process, even if you did that, really is there needs to be a commutation of the pension, and a commutation is simply turning the pension into a lump sum. Now for an account-based pension, that's easy because we look at whatever the account is, we roll it back to the accumulation account, and then what we would do is we then start it again with a brand new pension that would have a reversionary. So that's the process. As I said, it's easy for an account-based pension. If you've got a defined benefit pension, which is not really the case for many of us, then effectively, if we want to add extra terms and conditions, we're going to have an actuary to determine what that amount is, that amount that is going to be rolled back to the accumulation and then started again. We generally don't have that problem sitting inside SMSFs. It's mainly the larger funds, and not even the industry funds, maybe public sector funds. So we just have to be very careful. You can't just add, and if you come across documentation that had a pension and they've suddenly added an auto-reversionary, you've got to go back and do an analysis of exactly what has happened there. Now, once we've got the pensions up and running, then we can have a lot of fun with it. So it can be commuted. So we can take, if it's an account-based pension, we can take a pension amount out of there. In fact, we can take out it's actually interesting, we can't take out all of the income from, I suppose we could actually take all the income out of the pension, and then that pension would cease. Alternatively, I could take out the minimum, and then anything over and above that I could take out as a lump sum, which is our commutation amount. That makes a big difference for our clients who may be under the age of 60 and they want to access their superannuation. They've started up a pension, they've met the condition of release being retirement, they're over their age preservation age, which is probably around about 57 or 58 now, and then they take the amount out. Now, if they took the pension out, it's assessable with a 15% tax offset, but if they took out the minimum as required and commuted the rest, then that commutation amount, which would be a lump sum, and of course we've got that tax-free threshold for our lump sum. So again, there's different ways of cutting it. We can commute, we can take pension. As we said, I can roll it back to the accumulation. We don't necessarily even need to roll over the pension to another fund. We can simply do a pension transfer. So one trustee of a fund writes to another trustee of the fund and says, look, I've got this pension. will you take this on board? And as part of you taking that liability, because pension is a liability, here's the consideration. So you can actually do transfers that don't need to go through the rollover process, or it can be passed on death to the next reversionary beneficiary. So there's two ways of doing that. We can, if the pension ceases and we haven't got the auto-reversionary, you haven't got that reversionary built in there, then it can go back to the accumulation fund. And then once it goes back to the accumulation fund, all your pension paperwork is just shredded. So it's all finished. So now we go back to the accumulation fund and we check our SMSF will, or for those of you still in some dudsy old deeds and bond and death benefit nomination, we see whether a new pension or what they call a reversionary pension is allowed to be paid out of that accumulation account to, for example, our spouse or any child if they happen to be under age 18 or 25 or any dependent for that matter. So what we can do is we can go back. If we look at it from the originating document, if it provides an auto-reversionary, then we can go down the track. Now, importantly from that, when we have a look at the originating pension, it can only really be payable to myself. So if I start up a pension, then it's pretty obvious. I think most of you would be aware that it would go to me. Now, this is where I have to start blowing your minds. So, for example, both of my daughters are financially dependent upon me, and they're both under age 25. So if I have a look at the laws, and we'll consider those a little bit later on, but under the SIS Act, effectively, they can both be in receipt of the pension. So let's say I've got a $1 million pension, and then on my death, I want it to continue to be payable to my two daughters. So in that, in my documentation, I write that it's payable to my two daughters. Now, interestingly, when I do that, I've got a choice, and this is where we have to start to think about it like a house. My two daughters can take it jointly, or they can take it as tenants in common, or akin to that. So that the pension is either split. So if we're looking at equal proportions and there was $1 million on the account, they'd both get a $500,000 pension. Now, if it effectively is treated as separate pensions, then they will take it down the track. It'll now be their account balance. They go off and running. And we know anyway that any pension started must be commuted by age 25. In fact, in the documentation, I wouldn't let them go to that stage, because once it comes out of the superannuation system, if I'm a succession and asset protection person, then I'm losing the protection there. So what I would be having is a pension going until just prior to age 25, and then being commuted, but the money is to be paid out into a SMSF Death Benefits Trust, which is essentially just a leading member discretionary trust, and that would be on behalf of my daughter, Sophia. Now, the big issue between that is those pensions can be held like tenants in common, or alternatively, what we can do with those is effectively we can be in a position that they're joint. So if there's a joint ownership and something happens to Sophia, my oldest daughter, then effectively her portion of the pension will actually go back to my other daughter, Tiana, if that makes sense. So that when we start building these income streams, we can either split them at death if we wanted to, because traditionally most of you would only look at, for example, one pension that's then payable to one person. I'm telling you, it doesn't have to be that way. It can be paid to, for example, all my bloodline children at the time of my death. So what can happen is you can find your bloodline children, or my bloodline, and when I mean that, actually you should probably put lineage. Well, it doesn't matter, bloodline, lineage. Lineage is direct descendants. Bloodline is anyone who's got your DNA, if that makes sense. So lineage is very tight and specific. Bloodline is really anyone who's got your DNA, as I said. So we could, for example, have in there any of my lineage, who are my grandchildren and effectively are alive at the time of my death, are to split that pension. Now, if there's 10, then effectively there could be 10 pensions that arise out of it. Now, the determination from the trustee at that time is going to be, well, who is actually a dependent or a financial dependent of our member, our deceased member at that time. So when you're doing these documents, it's not just one-to-one and that's it. You've got to start planning this. And the reason we plan this is that it provides asset protection. So a couple of things on that. So if I'm a bankrupt, unfortunately, my pension income stream, not the underlying capital, but the pension income stream, the amount of the income stream, effectively, you're going to love this, effectively is to be treated as part of my bankrupt estate. So, for example, if my daughter was bankrupt, she's got $500,000, she takes out a $50,000 income stream, then that $50,000 is treated as income for bankruptcy purposes. Obviously, she's got money, needs money to live on. She'd work with the trustee in bankruptcy and work that out. However, if she takes the minimum amount, so that's 4% on 500, which is $20,000, and the other $30,000 is a commutation amount or a lump sum, that effectively is exempt from bankruptcy assets. So you can start to actually play around with it to say, well, hold on, part of my pension is actually going to be exempt. The lump sum's exempt from bankruptcy or her bankruptcy, but it's only the income that's actually going to be taken into account. So we've got a lot of little options there when it comes around to asset protection. And importantly, if we have a look at it, and this is the key thing, if I've done an auto-reversionary pension, so, and I will go through this a little bit later on, but it goes from myself to my daughter, then that portion, as soon as I die, that money goes straight over. So the process that you'll do, and I will be doing a strategy automation for this later on this year, that strategy automation will actually show that the monies go directly on. As soon as you get the death certificate, that pension has to change over. So my pension account, that $1 million I have there, ceases immediately. Now, that happens at the date of death. So it now goes over to my daughter. And the key thing about that one is that from a Family Provisions Act point of view, there's no challenge that can be made because it's no longer my property. At the time of my death, in fact, it's not property at all of mine. So it's passed on to someone else. Now, of course, it's now in her hands. If she dies, then it's subject to, obviously, the Succession Act or Family Provisions Act. So we've got to be careful about that one. And again, carry on the reversionary. So not only can we do a joint or multiple pensions on death, we can even carry it on. So we can have a reversionary of a reversionary, a reversionary of a reversionary of a reversionary of a reversionary. And I'll take you to the law a bit later on to show you where that comes from. So that a pension that we have, if we limited, for example, a pension is to go to this person, then that person, and that person, and that person, then effectively what we've got there, and we said that the minimum is always has to be looked at, but the maximum, they can't commute it. There is no maximum, so they can only take the minimum, but they're receiving a good income stream of, say, 7%, then that will carry on down the track and can last basically ad infinitum. Much the same, a pension can last for generations. So it's not caught up by the rule against perpetuities. It's the same as a self-managed super fund. A pension will last for as long as those reversionaries last. We can also put in time limits on the pension, residual capital values, and a change of reversionary pensions, as I said before. So once we start doing all this, we're starting to really open up our minds and go through the possibilities. Now, a lot of the time, this is not covered under the SIS Act, because the SIS Act simply says a pension is blah, which we'll have a look at. So a lot of these other things, as long as they're an income stream, it's paid from, there's a minimum pension payment for the recipient at that time, then everything else basically goes back to our equities and our common law, which really goes back to our annuity law. And as I said, the first ever annuity that I've found goes back to Roman times. So we've got quite a huge body of law there. Just sort of this time I'll give you a bit of an update. As I said, the 2-day March conference has been sold out. I'll probably do another one in November. But watch out, in May we're coming around. I'm going to do a succession and asset protection workshops around Australia in May. There will be, the 2-day event will be taped, and so you can use this as a training program for your team, and it will have CPD as well. So we're going to become an accredited CPD advisor or authority or whatever they call them, provider, how's that? So that we'll be able to test and provide our own CPD. So that's part of our service to make sure that you guys meet all your CPD requirements. Next week on the 20th of February, so that's next Thursday, just jump on to the, if you jump onto the LightYear Docs site, I'm going to be re-releasing our will with testamentary trust. So I've had a lot of feedback from all of you as to what you would like to include and what you wouldn't. So now we're going to be going through and looking at specific bequests and then having optional. So whoever's receiving that benefit, whether it's the residual estate or, for example, a farm is being bequested to a child, we can either have an optional testamentary trust that's created with the beneficiary's consent. Alternatively, we can have a mandatory testamentary trust. So the things must go into a testamentary trust. You'll be able to create that, plus you'll be able to put in T's and C's. For example, no capital amounts may be flowing out until age 25, so on and so forth. So we'll look at that next week. I've also put in there a couple of funky little ones. What happens to your social media on death, because obviously social media is worth something, particularly if it's tied to a business. What will happen to you, the transference of that social media? Will you bequest that to someone, or is it up to the executor? So we've now got that ability to look at that inside the will. The other one is pet guardianship. So if you're the last one alive, let's face it, pets have shorter lives than us. But if something goes wrong, what terms and conditions do you want in terms of that pet? Is to go to someone, they're supposed to get an amount from the will in relation to that. So we'll cover that next the 20th of February, which will be exciting. For those of you there, you would have seen. If you haven't, you can just jump on to the support centre and have a look at the protector. But this is probably my most exciting package to date, and thank you very much for Tim Munro working with me on this one. But the protector, as you've seen yesterday, takes equity from assets outside of an SMSF and inserts it into a leading member discretionary trust for the benefit of lineage or bloodline. Now, you can actually take equity out of an existing business trust or a services trust if you believe that they may be subject to a suit or litigation. It's also really useful because when we take equity out of an individual's name and put it into a trust, it means that avenue of wealth that would ordinarily find its way into a will or testamentary trust or family provision suddenly disappears. Now, we talked about this last week, and I'll go through it again. So if we have a look at succession planning, I love SMSF style. I've got the nice big red line down there, and we've got our wills and testamentary trusts. We can do a specific bequest. I'm a great believer in specific bequests. You'll find if you have a look in the support centre, our will with testamentary trust and fact find, the clients can put in there like 7 or 8 specific bequests. And specific bequests might be, for example, a vintage car. It can include all my jewellery to go to my granddaughter or whatever. May include a specific investment property is to go to such and such a person. As I said, next week you'll have the optional or the mandatory testamentary trust that you can have. You can pay it directly into an SMSF, or you can pay it into a trust. So we've got the testamentary trust, as I said before. So the will and the testamentary trusts are there, but once we get over that red line, that's where the family provisions challenge comes in. I just wanted to take you from here, and I've got up here, I've got a couple of things. So what I would suggest is, perhaps because I know you're on there, Ian, and you just love the legislation. This is the New South Wales Succession Act, but go and have a, you can see here, Division 3, property that may be used for family provision orders. And then we go down here, notional estate orders as well, and what transactions are caught. But go and have a look at your state-based ones, particularly from South Australia. What I'm going to do, though, is rather than go through all that gumph, I'm going to take us through to the Communities of Justice page, Law Access New South Wales, about family provision claims. So if we start there and understand what's going on, then it's a lot easier to, because our job is not just about SMSFs. Our job is to be succession and asset protection advisors. So as I said, going down the track, there's $3 trillion of wealth that's going to be coming up for grabs over the next 20 years. SMSFs is going to be around about 300 billion. So that's not a bad size, it's 10%. But what you want to do is make sure that we're brilliant at catching everything else. We don't want to get into this instance. If I have a look, that's the wrong one, here we go. For those on the Protector yesterday, you would have seen this. Is straight out of Perth now. If you're sending that will and testamentary trust engagement letter and data capture, definitely copy this. If you haven't got a copy of it, just let me know, and I can send you through the link there. But again, a Supreme Court judge has laid a scathing attack on lawyers who feasted on a small family estate with indefensible legal fees, describing as a scandal brings a profession in disrepute. I won't go into anything, but essentially what happened is Angela Miller, who was a de facto, challenged Andre Taylor's 2 children, who were the only beneficiaries in the estate. And the estate was only worth 600, but at the end of the day, up to the court case, the legal fees were more than $500,000. So once we had the 6 lawyers there who turned up to the Supreme Court in WA, one was from Melbourne, you probably would have been up around about $560,000. Effectively, there would have been nothing left, even though Angela got a $220,000 award, there would have been nothing there for the estate to pay out. And of course, nothing happened to those lawyers. Obviously the Justice Jeremy Courtois smashed them, but it meant nothing. So that when we come around from our perspective, we need to know what a family provision claim is. As I said, ideally, all of us, it'd be great to, if we died, to effectively have nothing in our estate and everything being looked after through a trust, or alternatively through our self-managed superannuation fund. As I said before, let's go through the family provision, then we can come back and have a look at how income streams are worked out. This is only for New South Wales. You could do this for exactly all of the various states that you've got. So what is a family provision claim? A family provision claim is an application to the Supreme Court of New South Wales. So again, we're going straight to the highest court in that state. Once you go to the Supreme Court, there's really no further place you can go. You can only go from maybe one judge, like the Jeremy Courtois. If there was a legal issue, you could end up with the full court of the Supreme Court. Just to even get there, to get it heard, if I go back to that Perth Now case, just to get it to be heard at that stage, you're looking around about $120,000 in costs and legal fees. So it's a very expensive process. For here, so an application to the Supreme Court is for a share or larger share from the estate of a deceased person. You can make a family provision claim if you are an eligible person, have been left out of a will, or did not receive what you thought you're entitled to receive. So it must be filed with the court within 12 months from the date of death. So that's why you see all the ads in the newspapers, on TV. Have you been left out of a will, or should you've got more, please come and see us now, because obviously there's a statute of limitations on it. So you don't need to have a grant of probate. So now here's a fun thing. Who is eligible to make a family provision claim? family provision claim can only be made by an eligible person. So that's obviously the wife or the husband of deceased. So that makes sense. So that's a person who's in a de facto relationship with the deceased, including same-sex couples. So if we have a look at that, that's where Angela Miller had the power, because the Western Australian law, there was, going back about 10, 15 years ago, they adopted a model family provisions law, which each state took on. Some of them still call it family provision, some call it Succession Act, they put in the Succession Act. And so all of the states have exactly the same laws. A child of the deceased, including an adopted child. Now, have a look at this one, guys. A former wife. Oh, sorry about that. I'm getting a bit excited there. So I'll just take it back. Sorry about that one. So I don't know what happened there. Okay. So if we have a look at it, a former wife or husband of the deceased, a person who was at a particular time wholly or partly dependent on the deceased and who is a grandchild of the deceased, or is it that particular time a member of the same household as the deceased? So if you've got children living in the home with their de facto spouses, those de facto spouses would effectively be caught up as an eligible person. And a person with whom the deceased was living in a close personal relationship at the time of the deceased person. So now what will the court consider? The relationship between the applicant and the deceased person, any obligations or responsibilities owned by the deceased person of the applicant. So that's going to be, have they made any promises during life? The value and location of the deceased person's estate, the financial circumstances of the applicant, including their current and future financial needs. And a couple of cases I've read can take up to, they go look at it for about 30 pages. You know, what's this person getting? What's this person getting? Compare it, so on and so forth. Whether the applicant is financially supported by another person, whether the applicant has any physical, intellectual, or mental disabilities, their age. Anyway, I won't go on, but essentially it goes through that process. So if you've got a lawyer, effectively you can be caught in there. Now, going back to where we were here, effectively the good thing about this is if I've got a reversionary pension, well, first off, if I've got a pension and it's not auto-reversionary, and when I mean auto-reversionary, it just simply means it ordinarily it just moves on to the next person. If I don't, then it goes back to the accumulation account. Now, the problem about that is, particularly in New South Wales, there is a case on the notional estate, which we haven't got time to go into. I certainly will go into it for about a fairly good session on the 23rd and the 24th. But that notional estate, they did attack the accumulation account of a member and made an award against the trustee of the fund to recover some of the amounts, so that someone was not looked after properly. In fact, it was the children of the deceased were not looked after by the wills properly. All the superannuation monies were looked after by the de facto spouse or second spouse, and there was an award there against the trustee of the fund. Now, that's if the pension goes back, the accumulation, or you've got accumulation, then even though it's to go to the reversion pension or lump sum or paying to SMSF Death Benefits Trust, it may be attacked under the notional estate. But remember, that is only from New South Wales. All the other states, effectively, if it stays in here, in this field up to that red line, you're basically safe. If the safest of the safest is having that reversionary pension. So as I said before, if it goes to my daughters or goes to my wife, Amanda, effectively, once it's in their hands, then essentially it's no longer part of my estate, and therefore the family provisions can't challenge it. So if the only thing that I had was that $1 million pension and it goes to both of my daughters, then, and I have no other assets that are sitting in my estate for my wills, except for, maybe a car or golf clubs or whatever, just some personal items, then when it comes round to making a family provisions challenge, it doesn't make any sense because there are no assets left in my estate. And actually make a challenge to get to the Supreme Court, as I said, you're going to need at least, a lawyer's not going to take it on unless you've got probably a couple $100,000. But they don't care. If you've only got $200,000, it's still worthwhile going down that process, as you can see from that Miller versus Taylor case. So we can make a family provisions. Reversionary pensions are the best. With a pension, I can always commute and take it out of that pension at any point in time. So, for example, you will see, I think, if I can remember, I've got my deed here, my little, this is my stock standard trust deed. If I have a look, so this is the SMSF establishment. I won't go through. So this is the, effectively our LightYear Docs. So I just want to show you something. I wonder if I've got it here, remember. So if I have a look at the definition of member, and you won't find this in anyone else. So there you go, you've got your member SMSF will includes a formal or informal set of binding directions made under these rules by a member and agreed to by the trustee in dealing with their SMSF legal estate to the benefit of the member's dependents or legal estate in the event of their death. So that's where we get the authority for that. Okay, so let's just go through this one. A member is a person who has applied for membership or has been automatically appointed as a member under the rules of the fund. And has been accepted by the trustee of the fund as a member. As a member has become a trustee or director of the corporate trustee unless the member is able to appoint a replacement trustee or additional trustee under the rules of the fund and the super laws. There is no requirement for the member of the fund to have a balance in their member accumulation account. So we can basically put anyone in there. And as there's no age-based requirement, we can basically set up an accumulation account for anyone. Now, for the sake of clarity, a member also incorporates a person's legal personal representative in their position as legal personal representative of the person, even when the person has died. And that's important because, as I said before, remember, if we've got a pension and if we haven't got a reversionary, so that membership ceases, it goes back to the accumulation side. Under the LightYear Docs deed, if we've got an account-based pension, if it was auto-reversionary, remember, goes to Sophia and Tiana, my children, that's it, it's all done and dusted. But if it doesn't go to them, so just a single plain old pension, then what will happen at that point in time is, as I said, under most deeds, it will fold back to the accumulation. Under our particular deed, or under the LightYear Docs deed that you're using, the pension actually carries on, so that any income here will flow over to the estate, but it still means that that pension continues on in force. There doesn't need to be a commutation. The reason we did that, and this is an important strategy, is what happens is your legal personal representative is appointed as it depends on what your trustee says, but let's just go through the process. If you've got a LightYear Docs deed or a LightYear Docs special purpose corporate trustee, your executor from your estate is appointed, and in fact you can have in your estate just a person who acts solely as your super fund executor if you want to go down that track. Remember, it's a bit like the EPOA. So what will happen is executors appointed automatically. Now, under the SIS Act, in order for it to be treated as a SMSF, it can only be from that point in time from the date of death. So we want to have automatic appointment of the executor as soon as possible after death until the first benefits commence to be payable. So the danger about that, if we have a look at it, if I go back and have a look at other people's, if we have a look at timeline, have a look at other people's deeds, if that pension ceases and goes back to the accumulation account, and let's say I've got $1.7 million sitting in the pension and it's ripe with capital gains or pregnant with capital gains if you've done a really good job, and it goes back to the accumulation account, then effectively what that means is that our capital gains are now exposed because there is no tax-exempt pension proportion because it is all now accumulation account. What I've done there, though, is by leaving it open to the executor to continue on to be a member, we can in fact commute that pension. And if we commute it while the pension is open, now we're going to have to work out where that commutation goes. We don't want it to go to the estate, otherwise it's going to be subject to family provisions. That commutation could be paid to children, or it can be paid to an adult child. With an adult child, you can still pay a commutation. You can't continue on the income stream. Remember, we had a look at that last week, SIS Regulation 621. Then effectively what happens there is we can commute, and that lump sum can go into a death benefits trust. Now, the important thing about that is while the pension's open, any commutation, as long as we leave $1 in that account, effectively any transfer of those assets or liquidation of those assets to go into an SMSF death benefits trust would see that the tax exempt proportion still retain the same. So there's still a tax exemption as opposed to the other strategy, which is why I left it open for the first stage. And then the SMSF death benefits trust is just simply a leading member discretionary trust. It's just a fancy name for that. The alternative is, of course, we could pay it all to the estate with conditions to go into testamentary trust, but it's always going to be subject to a challenge. With the accumulation stage, we're going to do a B2BN or an SMSF will. I covered that last week. Remember, we looked at 617A. The danger about that with 617A is that we can only talk about percentages being transferred to individuals. We can't direct that it's to be paid as a pension, believe it or not. Effectively, we want to get an SMSF will effectively going there. Again, reversionary pensions, lump sums, so on and so forth. We've got there from Simon, which is very surprising. He usually doesn't do CPD, but we've got a pension payment must go to an individual. That's correct. A commutation payment must again also go. Commutation payment can go to the estate, for example. The pension payment can go to the estate. So the process there, Simon, is I make a pension payment. The member's actually the estate, but effectively it's the member's or the deceased member's estate. So although it's going into a trust, into the estate, it is still the same as going to the specific member. There is nothing, as I said, there's the member there, but the member is de facto or treated as de facto alive for those sort of purposes, if that makes sense. Again, as I said before, where we've got that pension, just be careful, and you want to make sure you commute to SMSF Death Benefits Trust. I have to thank Simon for that because he's done quite a lot of work in that. And in fact, we both worked out and came up with that idea. So I'm sure he'll talk a lot about a very interesting case that he was working on, or he's been working on when we get to on the 23rd and 24th. Just one thing there, I had a lot of people, or a couple of lawyers that didn't really understand that if you have a look at the sole purpose test, provides that payments must either go to a member or to their dependents or their legal estate on the death of the member. Now, of course, if we've got the membership still open, there's no death there. But to get monies into a death benefits trust, you can't take money from a commutation directly in there. You can't take it from accumulation in there. What happens is, though, the payment can go to an adult child, for example, but it's paid under direction into a brand new trust there. So that's how that process effectively works. So let's just move on. Let's have a look at some of the laws. I won't go into any great detail. What I might do is I'll just go through, because I'm running out of time again. What I want to do is I'll just go through our account-based pension, then we'll come back and have a look. So I've done the deed up before, and you can pay a whole range of income streams. Let's go and have a look at the LightYear Docs income streams. So I'm just on the home page here. I claw down there, you can see income streams here. I'll view the category. So I've got account-based pension, current year pension payment. No, that's not me. A TRIS, well, no, not looking at that. Account-based pension, yep, that looks as though that's what I'm after. Account-based pension rollback, remember that's essentially if we wanted to add a reversion, we'd have a rollback and then start a new account-based pension. You've got pension commutations and TRIS fallbacks. So I'm just going to click on there, start the document. Oops, sorry, start the document. Now I have to put it in a folder, put in grants test. If you haven't seen me say that, I can't start with that. If I haven't got the green, I can't start it. So what I do is I either set a new folder up with the existing folder, put your cursor, see how my cursor is on the little T in test, go back, see how the green pops up, which is grants test, click that on and bingo, bango, bongo, I can actually start the account-based pension. So let's just go through a couple of these things. And I am going to make a change to this very shortly. So because it's in my folder, we need to isolate it. So I'll say grants. In fact, I'll make it Simon's test. You should have most of you would have been white labeled. If you haven't white labeled, you just need to contact us. See this support button here? Just press that support button. If you're looking at white labeling, just say, look, we like white labeling. This will give you a code. Here I'm using the Abbott-Family code to white label. Let's go to the fund and the member. So what's the full name of the fund? Let's go the Smith Family Super Fund. What's the full name of the John Smith? When's the application? Let's say he's going to come in next week and have a meeting for us. So what we're doing is we're going to do up a draft here for us. What's his birth date? So we're going to go 03/04/1952, and that will pop up the age. Oops, sorry. I have to put little 03/04/1958. My bad. So you can see there, the age of the member is, actually I wanted 52. The age of the member is 67. So when's the expected income stream commencement date? So we could say it's going to be the same day for one or the other one. Account-based balance, we've got 1 million. So it's all sitting in the accumulation account. In fact, it's a bit stupid if we've done this. So I'll make it 58. So we'll lift it a little bit later on. So 61. So because we've actually put in this date here, it's shown this is what our minimum annual payment is. If I don't put the date the income stream is, then I'm not going to know what my annual pension payment is because it's prorated. Now, this is important. So does the client want any pension amount above the minimum pension payment to be a commutation and thus a debit to the pension member's transfer balance account? So I'd say yes. The reason I do that is if the client continues to work, although they're taking the account-based pension, by living off that pension income, the minimum pension, the 14,250, would be essentially, so if I took 34,250 for the current year, then what happens there is 14,250 is the minimum annual pension payment. The other $20,000 through this documentation, as we'll see, is an auto commutation. So that would in fact create a debit to the commutation under section 294, I forget what it was. I have got the legislation open, I'm not going to show you. So the tax-free component, let's say it's 40%, then that would now mean I've just got to go down here and calibrate it. So I've got 60%. So the trustee's details, most of you should be using a special purpose corporate trustee. So we've got Smith nominees, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, Smith Street, Sydney. files 2000. So my typing's pretty hopeless there. 2+ directors. Let's say we've got 3. And that is, we confirm that. So the first one is John Smith, Sally Smith, and we've also got Matthew Smith, his son. So we then go, we tick boxes, they're all going to sign. If we don't tick the boxes, then we don't get any signature boxes there. Okay, so now everything is okay. So we're starting up a pension, it's going to happen next week. We've got John Smith and all that. Now, if I go no, then what happens is if John dies a week after us signing that, then effectively this pension ceases. Well, it doesn't cease because under our deed it will continue in the name of the executor. But at some point in time, once the executor leaves, it folds back to the accumulation account. So then it'll be subject to whatever SMSF will. Now, let's just have a look at the auto-reversionaries. So we can do, please insert the full name of the reversionary beneficiary. So let's say it's Sally Smith, and then I'm going to have a play around with that for you. In fact, we're probably going to get there. So Sally Smith gets the pension. So we've got here, select the T's and C's. So the first one is that in the event that Sally Smith remains alive at the time of my death, they are to take 100% of my pension in any manner or form that they desire as the superannuation laws allow. Now, this is a box that will actually come up in the documentation. Now, say Sally is my second spouse. And I say in the event that Sally remains alive at the time of the death, and what I could do is she is to take the minimum pension only, with the pension being non-commutable during her life, with any residual. Remember, residual is the amount capital being paid into a SMSF death benefits trust for my bloodline, with my eldest, my children being joint appointors, and that's right, trustee, the trust. Okay, so now you saw what I had before, but now if I've got a second spouse, what does that mean? So it means that Sally will get the $1 million pension, but she's only going to get 4% up to age 65, then the minimum. So she can't get above the minimum. She must be paid the minimum, and it's non-commutable. So she's stuck with a lifetime income stream, which is not a bad thing. Now, what will happen is at the end of her life, let's say we go down the track in this time next year, John's died, Sally's got the pension, then effectively from Sally's pension, it ceases, but she dies as well. Then what will happen is the trustee of the superannuation fund will create an SMSF death benefits trust and transfer those monies, which are really just being held by Sally, into a death benefits trust for the bloodline of John. Remember, this is a second spouse. So for the bloodline of John and his children, actually I should put in there my bloodline children, just to have emphasis, being joint appointors and trustee of the trust. Does that make sense? So I've given you a couple of ones. The basic one, which is just the typical writing, or there's this one as well. And what I might do is I might end up building some of these conditions in here. So you do have that documentation or wording there. Now, in the event of your death and the death of the reversionary beneficiary, so I've catered for one instance here, but here I've got another one which is quite interesting. In the event of my death and the death of Sally Smith, my superannuation pensions go proportionally to each of my bloodline children who remain alive at the time of my death, who may continue the pension or take as a lump sum as the super laws allow. If the reversionary pension beneficiary is a child that's under age 25, the pension is under the following conditions. It is to be paid as a non-commutable pension to age 25 with any drawdown in any income year limited to no more than 20% of the pension account balance. Any child over 25 must take the pension as a lump sum commutation. If the bloodline child is not alive at the time of my death, it is to pass to any of their children who are my bloodline, provided the superannuation laws allow and subject to the following conditions. Is to be paid to a non-commutable up to age 25 and any drawdown in any income year no more than 20%. So what we've got is a multi-faceted beast there that the pension can continue if the laws allow. Otherwise, it has to be paid out as a lump sum. If we wanted to, may continue pension or take as a lump sum to be paid into a SMSF death benefits trust. So we can put that in there as well. So you can start to see the reversionary pensions we've got here are quite sophisticated. So if no one remains alive, then we go down to 3. And so really, this one, we could actually turn off this because I've catered for everything what happens in the event of the death of Sally. She's getting virtually like a life interest. Now, in the event that either Sally, my bloodline children, grandchildren, or my dependents remain alive at the time of my death, my superannuation benefits are to pass to my estate to form part of any superannuation proceeds trust, which should be primarily for my bloodline. So bloodline just means anyone with your DNA. So what we're looking here is the bloodline children or grandchildren. Here, bloodline would include cousins, so on and so forth. But that's actually going to go through a super proceeds trust. So you've got an ability there. It'll be interesting to see. So you can see there, I've got that's basically stuck there. I could have always gone back and kept my original one. So when I go through here, I'll then go to the trustee meeting. So we've got John, Sally, Matthew. I already know it's going to be at Smith Street, so I just have to press select there. That pops up. Then we go to next, and then that will give me my PDF. Now, apologies, I'm running out of time here, but let's just have a look at this. Oops, so that took a lot longer than I expected. So what we need to do is just go back to the vault, and we should have grants test. We go down there. Okay, so it didn't come up. It's because I was fluffing around too many times. So if it's not there, we go into my in progress documents, grants test, and it should be account-based pension. Okay, so there's my account-based pension. I relaunch it. And then I relaunch it, go to finish, because I finished all the data. Oops. Okay, it doesn't look as though the data has stuck there. Oops. So I'm not sure about that one. It looks as though there was something wrong because I fluffed around too much. Just check. Okay, so there's a bit of a thing. It shows you how easy it is to lose things. Yeah, so there's no Simon pension. What I should have done is, as I've gone through, just be careful about that because it's a legal system. You've got to be very careful. As we go through, I should have saved the answers because then it would have then come up in my document. So again, apologise for that. It's because I was going back and I was adjusting all of these reversionary beneficiary stuff as well. But look, what I want to do is I'll in fact take this to whether it's next month in our session. I want to have a look at this case study and then I'll finish off the session. So I've got John Smith is age 64 and we'll have a look at this on the 23rd and 24th, but I'll do it in between. John Smith's age 64, has a account-based pension with 1.7 million that is 60% taxable component, and he's maxed his T-bar. His continuing work has an accumulation account with $250,000. His wife, Sally, is age 53, has an accumulation account in the fund with 600. They have a son, Matthew, age 40 in the fund with $120,000, is married to Janet, age 39, and 2 children, Ben, age 17, and William, aged 14. Marie is age 45 and from John's first ever de facto relationship when he was 18. His spouse at the time, Mary, is currently in rehab working out a problem stemming from John and Marie. John and Sally own a house as tenants in common in Manly worth $2.1 million and no mortgage. John has a share portfolio of $300,000 with a $50,000 capital gain, plus 2 investment properties worth $1.2 million with a $500,000 mortgage. If we wanted to, we could use the protector to rip out the equity of John, so the $1,050,000, and put it into a leading member death benefits trust, plus the shares, plus also the investment properties. Just take the equity out. Remember, we had a look at that, the protector. Now, John's wishes. Sally is to receive an income stream for her life with any residual capital value to pass to Matthew's family. So it's going to be completely different to the one I just built for you on the site, but it can be adjustment around it. The income stream amount is $1 million from John's account. Now we've got to work out, is there T's and C's around that income stream? Remember, I put in there she's only at 4% minimum. Sally to receive a life interest in the family home with any residual to pass to Matthew. Now we could put that inside the will, but if we've done the protector and everything is now sitting in a leading member discretionary trust, when it comes around to that, it means that Sally's not going to get a life interest in the family home. So you can actually use the protector to defeat a will if need be. The 2 investment properties we held for Ben and William. Marie is to get the shares and $400,000 in super. Any remainders to go to Matthew. Marie and Mary have told Sally and Matthew that they will challenge his will and super as Marie's partner, Jill, is a top estate planning litigator. So, I mean, when we have a look at this, I'll look at that case study. This is not very different to, you know, I know Simon, a lot of your clients, and also Ian and all those. It's essentially, this is much the same as you have a look at all of our clients. It's not a big deal, but can easily be suckered into maybe a 2 to 3 year effectively income stream for the lawyers, which will be fighting for the superannuation, so on and so forth, particularly if you've got a good litigator. The further we can keep things away from the trust, the better, from the estate, the better as far as I'm concerned. Anyway, I sort of run out of time. We will look at this case a little bit later on, but the main thread out of this is auto-reversionaries are perfect to get away from Family Provisions Act, and more importantly, provides great succession planning and asset protection. But of course, then we need to go down the track and have a look at the next generation. We can run the protector over the child's income stream if we want, and transfer that into a trust. Another one that I'd also put to you, for those of you coming to the conference, I'll send out these cases so you'll have a look, but the other one is we can gift from family trusts and individuals to superannuation funds. If it comes from an individual, then obviously it's going to be a contribution. But if it comes from a family trust, is it to be treated as a contribution? Just another thought. Anyway, it's Grant Abbott signing off.